The 12 decks of the transatlantic giant named Symphony of the Seas comfortably accommodates 6,500 happy passengers. They will enjoy an incredible adventure, a journey around the Caribbean. This is a quiet and peaceful place now. You won't find pirates here, unless they're from the entertainment team, of course. Several days of unforgettable rest await passengers, but throughout their voyage, they won't ever see the hundreds of devices, machines, and sophisticated bits of engineering technology, nor the nearly 1,500 people on the lower decks of the ship that are part of a crew of more than 2,000 who will make their vacation truly comfortable and safe. Symphony of the Seas is in fact the largest passenger ship in the world today. It's even been recognized in the Guinness Book of Records. But what do we mean by the largest? It's not actually about the size when it comes to ships. Another liner in the same class, Harmony of the Seas, is longer than Symphony by several centimeters. But the Symphony has the largest displacement, the amount of water that is displaced by the ship due to its volume. Remember Archimedes' principle? Well, the Symphony has a displacement of 228,000 tons. That's equal to 5 Titanics. A giant like this isn't able to enter just any port. In Russia, for example, there is only one that can accommodate this ship, in Vladivostok. While the most advanced places in this regard are countries in Asia, Europe, and of course, the United States. Port Miami, Florida's major seaport. Here is its cargo terminal. All in all, it has rather modest traffic figures. About 1 million containers move through here per year, so we've got maybe a dozen cranes and just a couple of ships docked here at the moment. This isn't what this port is famous for, of course. That would be something else. That I'll show you right now. Here is the world's largest passenger terminal for cruise ships. Here, behind my back, that's not a multi-story building, no. It's the stern of a ship named Symphony of the Seas. 6,000 people are boarding it right now. And in the span of just a year, 5,600,000 people pass through this passenger terminal. That's more than the entire population of Miami. It's not so much that Americans are particularly fond of cruises as it's that Miami is ideally located. Mexico, Cuba, and the Bahamas are all just a few days' travel from here. That's why this port was chosen by several major cruise companies to be their starting points. You can see that right now 6 different liners are all preparing to leave, and they belong to 4 different operators. But Symphony of the Seas immediately stands out from the others due to its incredible size. At about the same time when a shipyard in France began to build the ship itself, several thousand miles away from Europe, on a completely different continent, right here in Miami, they began to build this terminal. Again, essentially, it turns out that the ship wasn't built to fit the size of the port, but the port was built to fit the size of the ship. The main feature of this terminal, or maybe I should say the main art installation in this terminal, is these 2 rotating propellers which are exact copies of Symphony of the Seas propellers. They each have a diameter of 50 feet, and the weight of the real ones is 200 tons each, but these are of course a bit lighter. By the way, the ship doesn't have 2 of these propellers, but 3. They're mounted on podded propulsion systems, so-called azipods. Those are made up of huge pods which are suspended from the bottom of the ship at the stern. They are capable of rotating 360 degrees, meaning azipods provide the giant vessel with easy and quick maneuverability. I will show you in more detail how all this works in the second part of the episode, but for now, I will only say that these azipods were manufactured in Finland, and then sent by sea to the French town of Saint-Nazaire, the home of the shipyard where the vessel was built. In general, Symphony of the Seas is a huge construction set consisting of hundreds of thousands of parts which were manufactured in dozens of different countries located on different continents. So it began to unite people from distant corners of the world even before the first passengers of various nationalities ever stepped on board. Boarding a ship is very much like boarding an airplane. Even these gangways, well, those who often fly, they know that they are almost identical to those in airports. Well, maybe these are a little wider. Only planes have a maximum of 2 such gangways, while the largest airliners might have 3. But here there are 5 of them. And another interesting peculiarity, those who fly know that boarding of an aircraft starts about an hour before departure and stops 20 minutes beforehand. But since 6,000 people have to go through here onto the ship, boarding begins 6 hours before departure, so that everyone has time to make it on board. This is why cruise ships almost always depart in the evening. All day long, passengers come on board, get used to their cabins, and then closer to sunset, the gangway is finally pulled back, the doors are all closed, and the ship rolls away from the quay wall. Thanks to those azipods that we mentioned earlier, and an additional tail rotor, Symphony of the Seas completes this difficult maneuver by itself, without the help of any tugboats. Only a small Coast Guard patrol boat moves ahead of it, dispersing small pleasure boats and ferries out of the liner's path. This moment, already routine for the crew, is always quite exciting for the passengers, who at the moment of departure always pour out onto the upper decks. After all, the sea, and even more so these calm oceanic waters, aren't anything like railroad tracks, and these gigantic ships are actually seen off in a very different way from trains. However, the passengers will hardly have time to feel any separation woes on the ship. This giant floating city is designed to be fun and entertaining. The liner is 1,053 feet long, more than 3 soccer fields. Its width is 216 feet, and in this huge space there are 28 restaurants, 3 swimming pools, 10 jacuzzis, a theater equipped with the most complex Broadway machinery, an ice rink, a tropical park, a water park, a fitness center, a casino, and many shops and boutiques that constantly keep tourists in a state of shock and awe and continuous happiness. It is somewhat reminiscent of something out of a fairy tale, a place where you need only eat, sleep, and drink. When you look at the map of the ship, these are posted everywhere here, you get the feeling that the ship is some kind of toy. Yes, there's 12 passenger decks. Yes, it says 2,750 cabins, but what do all these numbers mean? You only start to get a sense of it right here in the elevator atrium. Just take a look. 6 high-speed elevators transport thousands of people to a height of 229 feet around the clock. And at the same time, all this is now moving at a speed of 30 miles per hour in the direction of Mexico. Incredible. Even more incredible is the fact that the ship is directly controlled by only 3 people while it's in motion. And among them, there is no boatswain, no skipper, no helmsman. Even the captain himself isn't on the bridge all that often. Today, the people who control the ship from here, from the captain's cabin, are no longer what you might imagine, sailors with tough, salty, weathered faces. They look more like office workers, and this place resembles some kind of control room or something. And here's my biggest disappointment. This is the captain's chair. There's no steering wheel. The ship is controlled by 2 special joysticks. They're called anti-mice. In general, everything is technologically advanced, safe, highly scientific, and completely lacking in romance, for heaven's sake. You no longer have to pore over maps to plot a course. The navigation system stores all the necessary routes in its memory. The computer plots the path, taking into account the shallows, reefs, and other features of the topography of the seabed, and satellites track the position of the liner. An operator just needs to plug in the arrival time for the next point on the route, and the computer will even calculate the speed with which the ship could move. It's kind of like autopilot. The next time a person will need to directly intervene is the moment the ship approaches a port. The width of the ship, I will remind you again, is 216 feet. Therefore, side mirrors here clearly wouldn't cut it for parking. So when parking, well, when mooring that is, they use a special mooring console. Here it is. By the way, it sticks out from the side of the ship a bit, you see. It kind of hangs over the side for better sight lines. There is a second, identical control panel on the other side of the liner. Either the left or right one can be used, and that's determined by which side of the ship approaches the quay wall. The compass and binoculars found here are likely more of a tribute to maritime tradition than anything else. Mooring here, again, takes place with the help of space satellites and GPS. When the ship finally gets into the correct position, it is, you might say, tied to the pier with special ropes. This is almost the only step of the whole docking process that looks pretty much the same today as it did several centuries ago. The huge ship is held in place by means of 22 of these extra strong ropes, each about 5 inches in diameter. Right now, they're stretched like piano strings, they even vibrate a little, and here's something amazing. If you knock on the rope, you'll have to take my word for it, it's very solid. It feels like there's some kind of metal core inside, but in fact, this is not the case. The rope is woven from a variety of synthetic threads. They're very strong, they have a high elasticity coefficient, they're able to handle the highest levels of stress, but at the same time, as you can see, the rope is already quite frayed, despite the fact that it's less than a year old. It'll be changed soon. Previously, mooring ropes, or to be more nautically accurate, mooring lines, were woven from hemp. The use of polypropylene fibers is a more recent development. These ropes turned out to be much stronger, and what is even more important, they don't absorb moisture, so they're much lighter. Curiously, on these ropes from the 21st century, these shields from the 16th century, if not earlier, are still put to use. They're called rat guards and are needed to keep rats from the shore from running up the mooring lines onto the ship. Today, this small Mexican port has a real full house. 3 cruise liners arrived here at the same time, and all the berth walls are occupied. Here, Symphony of the Seas, 6,000 tourists, Norwegian Dawn, about 4,000. And lastly, a ship called Celebrity Reflection. There are about 5,000 more people on it. In total, about 15,000 people are coming ashore all at once. This, by the way, often becomes a serious headache for the staff of the ships. In the evening, when tourists come back here, relaxed, we'll say, after sampling some tequila, they have a bad habit of trying to board the wrong ship. But there haven't been any cases of someone sailing away on the wrong liner, not yet. The stewards and representatives of the Port Logistics Service work like clockwork and don't drink tequila, just like the other 2,000 crew members of Symphony of the Seas who, unlike the passengers, don't go ashore when the boat docks. While tourists are exploring local attractions, on the lower decks, preparations for the main task of the day are underway. Cooking dinner for 6,000 passengers before they get back on board. And for this, you first need to bring up several tons of products from the storage area to the galley. Usually, the entire selection of products for the cruise is loaded onto the ship at the port of departure. The liner can only take water on it interim stops, and even then, only bottled water. They are very afraid of the possibility of food poisoning here. Since thousands of people live compactly on the ship, a simple case of E. coli can turn into a real epidemic in the span of just a few hours. And even putting that aside, not all countries can provide products of the high quality that Symphony chefs require. All the refrigerators and storage boxes here open automatically with the press of a button, but there is one door whose button is behind a lock. Thankfully, I have the magic key. You've probably already guessed what's behind this door. Here it is, the holiest of holy of Symphony of the Seas storage area. Here are several thousand bottles of elite red wine. Milk, meat, seafood, vegetables, frozen products, fish, all of that and more is stored in the dozens of other refrigerators. Anything and everything that might be needed to prepare the 350 different dishes that can be found on the ship's restaurant menus. Of all the foodstuffs stored on the ship, only 2 products are honored with having their own private refrigerators. Well, simply because they are the most consumed items. First, we've got bananas. Here are plenty of boxes with yellow ones, and there are also boxes with green ones. They will finish ripening during the cruise. And the second product is the most popular. What do you think it is? I'll show you now. Eggs. 120,000 eggs are eaten on board every week. Moreover, bananas and eggs are, as economists and logisticians say, goods of inelastic demand. Their consumption rate, and hence the required plant amount, is easy to predict. Things are more interesting when it comes to the rest of the products on board. A specially developed computer program analyzes the number of passengers and their nationalities even before setting sail, and depending on that information, it gives recommendations on how many of this or that product you need to take with you on any given voyage. For example, if there is a large number of Latin Americans on board, more meat and spicy foods will be added to the menu. If there are more Asians, they'll reduce the amount of dairy products, and if Indians are prevalent, they will increase the number of curry dishes, but at the same time they will bring less beef. One of the main delicacies of any haute cuisine is of course the Atlantic lobster. Here he is, such a handsome guy. This dish, by the way, is not cheap, therefore it is very rare. And even here it's cooked, well, not all that often. It's a one-of-a-kind item, one might say, made 6,000 times every day. Each of these workers, there are mostly Filipinos working here, shells about 500 lobsters a day. Those of you who have ever shelled, for example, crayfish, can imagine how much work this entails. On just 3 decks, more than 1,000 people are employed in this huge floating kitchen, 250 of whom are professional restaurant chefs. They fry, boil, flambe, sauté, and whip around the clock and in shifts. Take breakfast rolls, for example. 12,000 of them are baked here every day. In fact, the responsibility of the cooks here is enormous. The clients on the ship are very demanding, the products are expensive, and the cooking portions are gargantuan. Therefore, the slightest mistake in the proportions of ingredients can cost tens of thousands of dollars. Well, for example, tomato soup, 160 liters of it. If it's a little bit overcooked or undersalted, that's it. Eat it yourself since no one else will. Seating and serving several thousand people in the liner's restaurants at the same time is a separate logistical task, and they strive to make it so that customers don't have to wait more than 15 minutes for an order. Several hundred waiters of 50 nationalities cope with this task, each of whom must speak at least 3 languages. And bartenders should know at least 5. Well, technically there was an exception made to that rule. In general, everything on this ship suggests that this is a high-tech structure created according to the latest leaps of science. For example, in this bar, drinks are mixed, well, probably in the most progressive way on the planet. All you have to do is make your choice on the tablet screen. So, yes, we confirm, and that's it. We go up to the bar and that's it, enjoy it. Another high-tech installation, though it doesn't seem like one at first glance, is a huge park with its own microclimate, which is laid out in the central part of the liner. Here, among the shady alleys, serenaded by the songs of specially brought in crickets and frogs, it's easy to forget that you are actually somewhere in the middle of the ocean. In this park, not many, just no less than 10,000 plants have been planted, from rose bushes and orchids to lemon trees. And all this grows here, blooms and flourishes. What's the secret? I'll show you. Here, for every plant, maybe I'm not being generous enough. Well, for almost every blade of grass practically, there's a special tube placed next to it, which from time to time, now you will probably see it, yes, fresh water is sprayed out. And not just water. Now I'll show you the irrigation station. Here, through these pipes, 4 tons of specially prepared water are pushed every week. Here's the main secret. Here in this blue barrel, fertilizer is kept in here. Water passes through it, carries away some of the fertilizer, and carries it to the plants. So thanks, in fact, to this seemingly unremarkable little device, this whole huge blooming park exists. Another secret of the permanently green park is its honeycomb structure. There was no solid ground here. All the plants, from the trees to the grass, are inserted into special cells in separate segments, small plastic boxes. It turns out to be something like a huge puzzle. If one of the segments suddenly starts to get sick or dry out, it's simply changed out for a new one upon arrival at the home port. This wall of vertical landscaping in the ship's central park follows the same principle. The gardener, who turns out to be a bit of an industrial climber as well, simply climbs in the bucket and changes out the parts of the wall that he doesn't like and discards the old segments. There is no time for sentimentality. Nothing should prevent people from enjoying their time here and being filled with joy. Remember what I said at the beginning, that this episode was about a cruise ship without romance and without leaving anything out? In the next episode of Monster Machines, why doesn't the ice on the only floating ice rink in the Caribbean melt? Well, you know, it tastes like the most simple, ordinary Russian snow. How can 1,500 sheets be washed and ironed in one day? I want one of these for my house. Only thing is, I'm afraid it won't fit in my laundry room. Does Symphony of the Seas have enough lifeboats in the event of a disaster? How are the engines of this liner, which consume 3 tons of fuel per hour, arranged, and how do they work? 5th grade physics at work on the largest ship in the world. What is a 19th century telephone doing on a super modern ship? Hello? Bridge? And how can 30,000 plates get washed in 2 hours? Mr. Clean would be impressed. See all this and much more from the anatomy of the world's largest cruise ship in the next episode. In the first part of our look at the anatomy of the largest passenger liner in the world, we told you about and showed you why is Miami the home of this monster? Essentially, it turns out that the ship wasn't built to fit the size of the port, but the port was built to fit the size of the ship. Who are the people who run this giant, and why is there no helmsman on the ship? This is the captain's chair. There's no steering wheel. What room on the ship is the most secure and guarded? Here it is, the holiest of holy of Symphony of the Seas storage areas. And how many cocktail recipes does the least talkative bartender on the largest ship in the world know? You're not much of a conversationalist. All this was in the previous episode, and now we have even more about what's hidden inside this monster, a cruise ship without romance, but with science. And what could be less romantic on a ship than the machinery room? In the lower part of the ship, where tourists aren't allowed, day and night there's the roar of machines working in the semi-darkness, and these are what makes this entire giant city on water move. Symphony of the Seas is 6 diesel engines of a total power capacity of more than 100,000 horsepower. For a point of reference, that's approximately the power capacity of 1,200 cars. However, not even close to all of this energy is spent directly on moving the vessel. The ship consumes colossal amounts of electricity. For example, for lighting, there are about 140,000 light bulbs on the liner. Also, electricity is spent on the operation of air conditioning systems and on the production of large quantities of water vapor. Yes, despite the fact that steamers and steam engines are a thing of the past, modern liners still use steam. A lot of steam. No, it of course no longer rotates the turbines as it did, for example, on the Titanic, but steam is needed for more domestic purposes. It's a simple method for heating the water in shower showers and bathrooms, and it also heats different spaces when necessary. However, those aren't its main function. Steam is necessary for the heating systems for the huge fuel and oil tanks, and it's also used in fuel-oil separators. It's consumed by the turbo drives of some pumps, and, well, if it's necessary, for several other important machines on ships. It's consumed by the turbo drives of some pumps, and, well, it's still necessary for several other important machines on ships, even in the 21st century. Moreover, it must be perfectly clean so that impurities don't build up on the walls of the steam lines. Therefore, it is created from distilled water. But where do they get such large amounts of distilled water? It's produced right here on the ship using giant distillers. Here they are. There are 3 of them. The principle of operation is very simple. Well, it's basically a big tea kettle. This is where water from outside comes in. Here it's boiled, steam accumulates in the upper part of this chamber, and the sea salt settles down at the bottom. So after a while, overheated steam, there's a lot of it, enters this chamber. Here it condenses, and as a result, the finished distilled water is drained through the pipe. And the leftover salt? No, it's not used in the kitchen. They just throw it back into the sea. Several tons every day. This does not harm the environment in the slightest, since in essence, they're only turning the ocean's own salt back to itself, while keeping the moisture on board. Then the distilled water. Here it goes on to be filtered, and then it enters the boiler. Well, again, the principle of its operation is about the same as that of the boilers, which many of us have in our bathrooms at home. There is a small burner here at the bottom, and a tank of water on top. A very large tank, 5 tons, and it starts boiling in just a matter of minutes. In the end, the resulting steam is used for its intended purposes. Moreover, part of it, when it condenses again, is sent back to the boiler. This is the so-called reverse cycle. But most of it is irretrievably lost, and therefore the reserves of distilled water have to be replenished all the time. It's also needed to freeze an actual skating rink on the ship. Here you can skate during the day and watch an amazing ice show in the evening. That includes a number of Russian figure skaters. And by the way, the ice here is of a very high, one might say, Olympic quality. The ice on the rink measures in at about 3.5 inches thick. Well, surely many of you have seen an ice resurfacing machine on TV, or maybe even in person. They've got the exact same kind here, though maybe it's a little smaller than typical ones. By the way, since this ice is frozen from desalinated seawater, it doesn't freeze quite as well. And according to the skaters, this ice is softer than that on which they are used to performing on land. To be honest, it's hard for me to imagine how ice could be soft, but what is absolutely certain is it's incredibly clean, distilled. I even gave it a taste, but it was really nothing miraculous, just your typical snow. The total weight of the ice in the arena is several tons, and a refrigeration unit is needed to freeze it. Again, it's about the same as the one used on professional skating rinks and professional arenas. Well, this one might be a little smaller. It's located, as you would expect, in the area under the stands. The principle of its operation is very simple. Through special pipes, here they are, wrapped in thermal insulation, water and refrigerant with a temperature of 14 degrees Fahrenheit are pumped to the arena. This freezes the ice layer by layer. It takes about 5 days to prepare the entire ice rink. The owners and designers of Symphony of the Seas claim that this ship is not only the largest in the world, but also the safest. There are so many different safeguards in place in its control system that it is argued it's almost impossible to lead the liner into disaster, even if you were to deliberately try to do so. Still, in the event of an extreme case, there are means of evacuating the ship on board. They have to accommodate the evacuation of all passengers and crew if something were to happen. These lifeboats, to match the ship, are the largest in the world. Each has a capacity of 370 people. There are 18 of them on the ship. Moreover, they are kept fully prepared at all times. Their fuel tanks are filled, they have a cruising range of about 155 miles. There was a special supply of dry rations and water on board in special sealed boxes. In the event of a disaster, there would be no time to bring it all from the ship. In general, everything is thought out to the smallest detail. This unsinkable and waterproof plastic jar, for example, contains signal flares. In addition to the huge boats, there are also many rafts that inflate themselves in the water and several of these high-speed rescue boats. They are used to coordinate action and quickly help people who find themselves in the water. The crew must participate in evacuation exercises at least once a month. This vessel has never seen a real red alert, but thanks to constant training, 2,000 crew members are ready for any turn of events, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The ship also has its own waste recycling plant. Here it is. This, for example, is a machine for pressing cardboard packaging. Here, cans are collected. Then they are all crushed into these large bricks. Cellophane is processed here. At first glance, it is a little paradoxical how they deal with glass bottles. I'll show you now. They are simply broken into little pieces so that they take up less space, and they are sorted as follows. Here we have a big bag with dark glass. Here we have broken transparent bottles, and here we have green glass. And here's what's surprising. As is everywhere else on the ship, in this waste recycling shop, everything is kept perfectly organized. There isn't even an unpleasant smell here. The creators of this ship seem to have a thing about cleanliness and environmental friendliness. In a good way, of course. For example, the liner's engines burn several tons of diesel fuel every hour. But at the same time, not black, not even blue, but exclusively white smoke comes out from the Symphony's exhaust pipes, all thanks to scrubber cleaning. Well, if to simplify it as much as possible, the exhaust gases are washed with seawater. This dirty water is then maintained and stored in special tanks until the ship arrives at a port, and only carbon dioxide with a minimum amount of soot and impurities is released into the atmosphere. Scrubbers and engines are managed from this control room. It's located in the very center of the ship, almost at the waterline itself. Therefore, there are no huge windows to be found here, like on the captain's bridge, but there are 51 monitors which display thousands of different parameters. The largest touchscreen control panel even had to be hidden in the ceiling. Here it's already pretty cramped without it. There's a special emergency phone in this control room. Well, there's a telephone for singular emergencies. Its peculiarity is that it will work in any case, even if, say, God forbid, of course, all systems here completely fail and all power is lost. By what means? I'll show you now. Good old inductive coil. This technology, well, I don't know, it's probably around 120 years old, and it's very strange to see it on this ultra-modern ship. But technology such as this is sometimes the most reliable. Hello? Bridge? Apart from that, the equipment in this control room is of a quality comparable to NASA's Flight Control Center, and the whole vessel is practically a spaceship. Sure, they're not jet, but diesel-fueled V engines, but each weighs about 200 tons. 2 of them are 16-cylinder, 4 more are a bit smaller with only 12 cylinders. These giants were made in Italy, and then they were sent by a special convoy, first along blocked-off roads, and then delivered by sea to a shipyard in the French town of Saint-Nazaire. Building each of the 6 fiery hearts of this monster was such a difficult technological task that we decided to show it to you in more detail. That's why we're taking the reverse path to the engine, from the Caribbean Sea into Miami through France to the Italian industrial port of Trieste. The company that makes the world's largest marine engines in Italy is actually from Finland. It's called Wärtsilä. It got its name in honor of a small Finnish village where this business once originated. It's curious, but today the urban-type settlement and the Wärtsilä station of the October Railway are part of the Sortavala region of the Republic of Karelia, a typical Russian single-industry town with a modest budget. At the same time, Wärtsilä has an annual revenue of several billion dollars. But back to the engines. Each of them consists of several thousand parts. Some of them are made right here in Trieste. Some come from subcontractors. Cast and forged blanks, for example, are sent from a metallurgical plant in the Czech Republic. The so-called connecting rods come here to the plant in this form, crudely forged, very coarse to the touch. Here, they are then installed in these machines. They each weigh 330 pounds, by the way. Many of us, when we were kids, not everyone of course, in shop class did something similar, carving out various objects. It's about the same here, only the size is much larger, and the accuracy is very high. As a result, the connecting rod is worked to, well, just to a mirror shine. Everyone who has ever gone over the engine of their car, seen the pistons, immediately recognized them. Well, this one, believe me, is exactly the same. Well, a little bigger. This weighs about half a ton. And the volume of the cylinder in which it works is 6.5 liters. That, by the way, is a bit more than the total volume of my car's engine. Well, alright, not a bit more, several times more. And this, I repeat, is only one cylinder, and in 2 of the engines on Symphony of the Seas, there are 16 cylinders, just like this one. And the main difficulty here is that huge parts, that sometimes weigh several tons, must fit together perfectly. After all, there is so much force and heavy loads involved that the slightest deviation or inaccuracy can send the engine off the rails, and in the open sea, that can threaten a catastrophe. Therefore, manufacturing margin errors are as severe as with Swiss watches. Well, by the way, using the crankshaft as an example, you can easily understand the principle of operation of a piston engine. Look, in this position, for example, the piston would be in the upper position, and this crank pin is also up. At the same moment, the other piston is in the lower position, and the crank pin, respectively, is at the bottom. Thus, the pistons move up and down, and the shaft rotates. Everything is very simple, but the most amazing thing is that this particular shaft weighs 25 tons, its length is 26 feet, and it's made of one single solid piece of metal. Just unbelievable. By the way, there are only a few metal lads in the world that can carve a 26-foot item like this from a multi-ton bar of high-strength alloy steel. The turner's worst nightmare here is to screw up even one detail. The crankshaft is worked on for several weeks, and it costs more than $1 million. Ultimately, after numerous checks and tests, the crankshaft and thousands of other parts are sent to the assembly area. In a few more weeks, the engine is finally ready, and now tests await it. If everything is in order, the engine is rolled back onto the ship, all technical fluids are drained, and it's checked again and again. In the testing chamber, the engine has already been checked out by numerous automated computer systems, sensors, and so on and so forth. But no one has done away with the good old visual control test. Everything here, again, is like in a car. We open the hood and look inside. Perhaps the most important difference between this engine and a car engine is that there are 12 of these hoods, or rather viewing windows. Behind each of these windows is one of the cylinders and valves connected by a connecting rod to the crankshaft. If you wait for the oil to drip down from the parts, you can simply see with your eyes if any jams or other metal defects have formed during the tests. When at this stage the inspectors give the go-ahead, the only thing left is to pack up the engine and send it to the customer. But that's easier said than done. Anyone who has ever, well, transported, say, a dresser knows that the most necessary thing to get that done are duct tape, some styrofoam. Oh, here we have some. Well, and a lot of bubble wrap. When moving a finished engine, everything is about the same. All protruding parts are carefully wrapped with these foam corners, sealed with tape, cling wrap, and so on and so forth. Well, in general, everything is the same as when moving furniture. There is a slight difference, though. The weight of this dresser is 180 tons. It takes a week just to get it ready for transportation. By the way, at the same time, road services and a special platform, the only one in Europe that can support such a weight and size, are being prepared for the giant's move to the port. Only here, at the very end, in the finished goods warehouse, can you begin to understand the true scale of this giant engine. Its height is about that of a 3-story building. It weighs several hundred tons and generates the amount of electricity that would be needed for a small Moscow neighborhood. The actual biggest mechanical heart in the world of the world's biggest cruise ship. And let me remind you, Symphony of the Seas has 6 of them, and although at the same time, even at full speed, usually no more than 3 of them are working, the fuel consumption is still massive, and that's why the company that owns the ship uses a little trick. At the starting point of the journey, in Miami, they take on board only as much fuel as is needed to reach the next port, where fuel is cheaper, and when they're already in Uruguay or Mexico, for example, the liner is filled up with diesel all the way. Thanks to this, the ship owner manages to save several $1 million per season. However, there is one caveat. For some reason, the fuel from these countries often contains water. By accident, of course, I'm sure, but this is unacceptable for the engine. Therefore, all fuel is cleaned directly on the ship before being fed into the combustion chamber. But how can several tons of fuel be cleaned per hour and when moving at full speed too? And here, centrifugal force comes to our aid. Fuel enters these separators, which are in essence huge mixers, and it's spun at a breakneck speed. What happens in there? Water, which is heavier, is forced out to the walls, and the oil product, as the lighter portion, accumulates in the center and then enters the engine. 5th grade physics at work on the largest ship in the world. At the same time, the fuel in the separators is also heated. That makes it more runny and it therefore burns better. By the way, the liner has an electric drive. No, its powerful internal combustion engines do not directly rotate the ship's propellers. They spin generators that generate electricity. And then, along the high voltage lines hidden in the bowels of the liner, the current travels to the electric motors, which spin the propellers. This diesel-electric circuit makes the vessel more maneuverable. After all, an electric motor, unlike a piston one, can stop and change the direction of rotation almost instantaneously, and it doesn't need a gearbox. The motors, together with the propellers, can also rotate 360 degrees around their axis. Therefore, it becomes very easy to operate the liner. However, even the most high-tech devices and numerous automatic safety systems are not able to 100% protect the ship from basic human error. 3 weeks after we filmed this episode, in the same Mexican port where Symphony of the Seas stopped for an afternoon, 2 cruise ships managed to collide. Oh my God! There were no casualties, both ships even continued on their voyages, but still, this situation once again reminded me that regular emergency evacuation drills on the ship are not at all excessively precautionary. However, maybe no less dangerous than a collision with another ship would be a situation in which 6,000 passengers were left hungry. They almost seem to fear this even more here. The 350 exquisite dishes on the menus of 28 restaurants will satisfy even the most demanding customer. We already showed you how this monster's kitchen works in the first part of this episode, and perhaps at this point the question occurred to you: how can you quickly wash a large number of plates, mugs, glasses, and cutlery after dinner? On this ship, in general, all technological processes that can be are built on the principle of a conveyor belt. Well, this is logical, of course, because this is one of the most effective forms of labor organization. And here, in the kitchen, the dishwasher is also one huge conveyor machine. Come with me, I'll show you. Sorry, dirty dishes are being loaded from that side and clean ones are already coming out here. The whole process takes less than 1 minute, extremely fast. Mr. Clean would be impressed. There was no other choice, because after every dinner, about 50,000 dishes have to be washed, and that's not counting the kitchen utensils. Though it may seem like less than a critical machine, The dishwasher on the ship is actually such an important unit that it has a twin backup in case the main one breaks. Another one of the liner's important machines is the washing machine. It was built to special order and installed in the bowels of the ship at the time of its construction at the shipyard. A whole 2 technical decks of Symphony of the Seas have been given over to laundry. Here, about 10,000 towels are washed every day. They also tried to automate this process as much as possible. Housekeepers collect dirty towels from the rooms, sort them by color, and send them to the laundry decks. Here, they are loaded into this receiving bin. Homeowners know that the most difficult thing to iron are sheets and duvet covers. It's really quite time-consuming to do with an iron, but here you have to iron 2,000 sheets every day. And that's why they installed this machine here. It not only irons the sheets, but also, this is the most amazing thing, I'll show you now. It folds them. Look, in an ideal way. Not just anyone can do that. In short, I want one of these for my house. Only thing is, I'm afraid it won't fit into my laundry room. The laundry employs several hundred people. There's more than 1,000 in the kitchen, dozens more are in the engine room and on the bridge. A huge army of the crew invisibly makes every second of the stay of the passengers on this ship unforgettable, comfortable, and safe. And yet the passengers themselves will never see most of them. Only service personnel who are in direct contact with tourists are allowed to climb up onto the passenger decks. That includes waiters, maids, bartenders, salespeople, hairdressers, and other staff. Others, sometimes for several weeks at a time, don't leave the depths of this monster and go out into the sunlight at all. But keep in mind, first of all, they are well paid for it, and second, at the end of the day, they work on the largest cruise ship in the world. And although they can't take in the incredibly beautiful sunsets of the Caribbean Sea from their own balcony, behind the walls of their cabins, which are located on the lower decks, you can hear the rush of water. Yes, I promised that it would be a story without romance, but still.